Hello students, welcome to the Analyst dated 8th of February 2024. Today we'll look at 4 articles from the Indian Express and the Hindu. The first article will be regarding fossil fuels, and then we'll understand what is energy transition. Then we'll understand privacy or the right to privacy, and lastly we'll look at the World Trade Organization. Let's look at the first article. This is regarding fossil fuels, and the context is that on one hand, you have the developing countries who are energy hungry, who are resource hungry. On the other hand, in the backdrop of climate change debates, these developed nations, they are calling in for reduction or absolute ban of fossil fuels as we go ahead. Now, in this backdrop, this is a very important topic. So the first two topics, the fossil fuels and the energy transition, they are extremely contemporary topics, and you can expect at least one mains question from this area. Now, please understand that we are looking at fossil fuels, and so we can essentially say that these are nothing but natural resources. Now, how they are created? They are created by temperature and pressure and time. So over the period of time, if you are, let's say you have some organic material, you have some plants, you have some trees, you have the remains of animals, all of this, let's say, is somehow put underground. Let's say a particular piece of land, it topples over another land, and let's say there were forest here. So what will happen? The forest will be subsided, yes, so a rock will come over it, some sediments will come over it. Over the period of time, what will happen? There will be action of temperature, there will be action of pressure, and with this heat, over the period of time, your fossil fuels are created. Now, there is the timeline. You must understand, this is not thousands of years, the timeline is millions of years, and we also call these fossil fuels as non-renewable resources. Now, when you are talking about non-renewable resources, you are essentially saying that the total amount of resource is limited. That means there is a basket, and out of which you have used some part and some part is left. That means they are prone to depletion. And one good example that you pick from India is, let's say, the lack of copper thereof in our country, right? Or for that matter, talking about gold or talking about oil. So over the period of time, these finite resources, whether you're looking at oil, you're looking at gold, you're looking at copper, the finite amount of resources will gradually, it will decline, right? On the other hand, that is when you start importing these resources. Now, simultaneously, you must understand that there is a lot of environmental impact that is attached to these fossil fuels. The reason is that these are made up of carbon, and once you oxidize carbon, or there is some combustion of these fossil fuels, so ideally you are getting carbon dioxide. If you have low oxygen, you are getting carbon monoxide also. And simultaneously, if you know that our coal also has sulfur, so all these elements will get into air. It will create a newer problems like air pollution. So air pollution is one issue, and simultaneously you will have some of these gases which act as greenhouse gases, and that is why for the last 200 years our energy usage has been to fossil fuels. And this energy usage, which is dependent on fossil fuel, has created what we call as anthropogenic carbon emissions. So because of the industrial revolution starting from Britain, we started using these fossil fuels. So how did we grow? We grow on the backdrop of use of fossil fuels, particularly coal. And please understand that very gradually we came to oil. So first coal was there, then we transitioned to gas, and now there is another transition that is going as we speak. Then you are also looking at the global energy consumption. Now if you look at it, you are seeing that oil is contributing 33%, natural gas 24%, coal 27%. Now please don't confuse between two particular words. One is energy, the other is electricity. So when you are saying energy, that means any source of energy, whether you are burning, let's say your burner, or you are burning fuel in your car, or it is for your home consumption, it is for heating purposes, all kinds of energy usage. So where what you are looking, that you will see that a very little part of the global energy is coming from renewable sources or nuclear sources or hydroelectricity. So today you have, as we speak, more than 80% of our energy today is coming from, the fossil fuels. Now, what is the composition? So composition is primarily carbon, hydrogen, sulfur, nitrogen and oxygen, and when they are combusting in the presence of oxygen, they will create their own set of pollutants. Now you are creating coal. Coal are of many types. You have anthracite, you have bituminous coals, so you have peat, you have lignite. So all these coal is created by the subduction of forest and plants. So you have natural vegetation which is somehow subsiding below the earth, which is creating our coal. What about oil? So when you have, let's say, living organisms trapped beneath the surface of earth, then you are creating oil. And along with oil, at times you also find your natural gas. In some portions you will see that natural gas is also found in a standalone basis. So gas can be found with oil and without oil also. Now when you are looking at natural gas, you are primarily talking about CH4, that is methane. Then what is your usage today of fossil fuels? So you are looking at thermal power plant, yes, you are looking at transportation fuel, you are looking at heating, you are looking at cooling. So whether you are talking about your railways, your roadways, whether you are talking about your electricity, whether you are looking at our cities, so all of these functions, they are being powered by the fossil fuels. And what proportion? We are talking about 80% of the energy today is coming from these fossil fuels. Now these fossil fuels will include coal, oil and natural gas. At this juncture you must also understand some prelim pointers, that when you are talking about coal, okay, so you have coal reserves which are fifth in the world, and if you look at the top producers, you will see that US has the highest amount of reserves, then Russia, Australia, China and India. So India has cumulatively 106 to 107 billion tons, which is 10% of the global coal reserves. Now if you are looking at the production, we can have the statistics that we are getting 75% of our coal from domestic sources, and the 25% we are still importing. And one part of this import bill is the coking coal. Now if you look at the particular important mines, then you will see that you have Raniganj, which is in West Bengal, you have Jharia, you have Bokaro. In Bokaro you have multiple mines. Jharia, similarly, you find the best quality of coal here. What is that coal? Yes, and that coking coal is also associated with burning, which is continuously being burnt. Then you have a place in Chhattisgarh along the Mahanadi plains, which is called Korba. So in Korba you have in Wardha, again in Madhya Pradesh also you have in Pen, okay. And then you have in Godavari Valley, you have in Kadapa in Andhra Pradesh, and here you have the lignite, which is called the Neyveli lignite, and one particular company called the NLC India is working on this lignite. Rest of the coal mines are usually under Coal India. So you must also understand that how this industry is now working. This industry is largely dominated by public sector undertakings. Now when you are looking at consumption, what do you see? You have the second in the world, and your production is second in the world, but your reserves are fifth in the world. That means you are depleting your coal reserves very fast. Simultaneously, you must also understand that 25% we are importing. So if you look at the trends, what we are seeing is that our production of coal is also increasing, and we have somehow a constant import bill on coal. Now when you are looking at the states, so you will see that Jharkhand has the highest proportion of coal. And what particular mine should you remember? The Jharia coal fields of Jharkhand. Now, when you are looking at oil or you can call as petroleum and all the associated products, you have very few locations where it is found in India. So now the ratio reverses. Now you are producing 25% for your own consumption and approximately 75% you are importing, and this amounts to approximately 17 lakh crores of import bill. Now every time we are talking about oil, we always talk about energy security and our import dependence on the Middle East. Now that brings us to the question that where is this oil found in India and where is this found globally? So if you're looking at this region, particularly the Mumbai High offshore, now oil you can find onshore, that means within the mainland, and offshore, that means towards the sea. Why? Because you are looking at the production of oil whenever there are some sediments, some organic sediments, living organisms, they are trapped. So whenever there are some rivers which are depositing all the dead animals and carcass under the sea, so these are the areas. So let's say areas where rivers are depositing sediments. So in these areas you will tend to find, let's assume that some rivers are flowing. So what happens? The river is continuously bringing more and more marine organisms and organisms in general, and so this area, onshore as well as offshore, it becomes a very good place to have oil. But in India, where are you finding it? You are usually looking at the Brahmaputra valley, where you are looking at Digboi and Nahar Katia, and here you are looking at the Mumbai High Basin, where you are getting in Gujarat also, you are looking in Maharashtra also. So Kalol, Ankleshwar, Baseen and Mumbai High. Now simultaneously you should look at this trend that is very important for us, is that while our imports have constantly increased. Now here there are two important aspects. You have to look at a volume, and second you have to look at value. So volume wise, naturally there will be an year on year increase. Why? Because economically we are growing. So today if I am expecting that our economy is at $4 trillion and tomorrow if it is at, let's say, $10 trillion, so I would naturally expect that I will need more oil and gas, right? So the volume tends to increase each year, but the value only depends on from where I have imported and what was the price of oil that particular year. For example, during the Russia-Ukraine crisis, we started importing lots of oil from Russia, but at a discounted rate, right? Now, you look at some of the global reserves of oil, so you will find that Venezuela and Saudi Arabia, they dominate in the oil reserves. And so UPSC tends to ask that, resources are geographically unequally distributed. The distribution of these natural resources, particularly the energy resources, is extremely unequal, and this inequality in resource distribution, it leads to different changes in geopolitics and geoeconomics. Now if you look at this area, this is the Caspian Sea area, then you have the South China Sea, then you have West Africa, you have Persian Gulf, you have the Mediterranean Sea, you have the North Sea, you have the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean Basin. So in these areas you will find majority of the oil. But if you are looking at geographically, you will find one of the highest concentration of oil in the Arabian Peninsula, and that is why it is very easy to import from these regions. Second, the economies are also dependent on oil, so they are oil economies. Thirdly, you will have something called as the Asian premium dumped on us. Asian premium on all oil imports coming from the Middle East. So that begs us the question that if you're looking at 17 lakh crores of imports annually going towards oil and gas, so you also have to move away from oil, and you have to find some alternatives of these oil imports. That brings us to the third source of fossil fuel, that is our natural gas. Now what do you see in our natural gas? You will see that one country dominates in terms of import, and that is Qatar. Now if you look again in our natural gas reserves, again you will have Gujarat and Bombay high basin, and then you have the Krishna Godavari basin, and then in some parts of the again Assam Brahmaputra valley. Now if you are looking at the natural gas reserves, one country triumphs over other, and that is Russia. Associated with this, you should also know where are the most important gas basins associated in the world, because that can be a very good mains question of how the oil and gas is distributed across the world. So I would ask you to do some research on natural gas, on oil, and find its distribution along with its industries across the world, because this comes in your GS1 geography. Let's look at the second article, and this is about energy transition. Now the minister is saying that we need orderly energy transition without vilification of fossil fuels. So by this time we have learned that today global energy scenarios are that 80% of our energy is coming from fossil fuels. Simultaneously, we should remember three stats, that today we are importing 75% of our oil. Yes, we are importing approximately 50% of our gas, and we are importing 25% of our coal. Now, don't you think that in terms of energy, we are super dependent on the world? And that tells me that a lot of geopolitical events can alter how my economy will behave, or how my people in India, back in India, they will consume energy. And please understand, now energy consumption is more of a right, because the moment you start growing, and I am talking about not a fundamental right, but right of every person who is living on this earth, and you as an Indian citizen would naturally want your space of energy. You cannot say that all the energy has been consumed by the United States and the Great Britain, and so you don't have any energy to consume, right? So you also need, and I also need, that sufficient amount of energy for my own growth, for your own growth. That brings us to the question that today we are looking at issues like energy crises, energy wars, and energy security. So all these issues, they become very fundamental. When I'm talking about crises, I am essentially referring to the depletion in natural resources. Secondly, I am looking at the geography of these natural resources. Not all the countries are having equitable distribution of natural resources. When I'm looking at energy war, we have seen that the natural resources were weaponized. For example, your gas, your oil, that was weaponized by Russia during the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So it cut off a lot of supplies to the Western European countries. Suddenly, due to which what happened? That there was inflation, right? What about energy security? So time and again, our Prime Minister will talk about energy security and how we should be Atmanirbhar in energy needs also. Now, what do we know? We know that globally we are producing 80% from your fossil fuels. B, you are importing oil, gas, and you are importing coal. So today we are moving away from our fossil fuel. We are moving away from whatever we learned. We are moving away from coal, we are moving away from oil, we are moving away from natural gas. But does that mean that we have to stop using all these resources? The answer is no. Now, there comes the idea of sustainability. Now, what happens is that, let's say I have two sources of income, okay? And let's say one of those sources is a new source of income, okay? And which will gradually increase, okay? Simultaneously, I have another source of income which will gradually decrease in one case. Or can I say that I will have one source of income which will remain constant. Now in this case, what happens that my overall income, it will gradually increase only. It will gradually increase only. Now, let's say I ask you a different scenario. In this scenario, what I'm asking you, that from one source you are earning 100 rupees, from other source you are earning 0 rupees. But now gradually with incomes you have now started earning 10 rupees. Now I am asking you to absolutely shut down this 100 rupees. Don't get 100 rupees. So will you be sustainable? The answer is no. Because earlier you had 100 rupee income and then you had 110 rupee income. Now I'm asking you to consume only 10. So this is unsustainable. You cannot live on this. So similarly, there is a debate which is ongoing, which is asking all of us, particularly this debate is for developing countries and for growth hungry countries. So any country which is growth hungry will also be energy hungry, which will also be resource hungry in general. And so these growth hungry countries, these energy hungry countries, they will ask for more and more fossil fuel, while the world is asking you to shut down fossil fuels. So this brought this term called energy transition at the foray. Energy transition simply means that you are using one type or one basket of energy, and please understand this word basket, because I am not deriving all my energy from coal. I am deriving some energy from coal, some energy from oil, some energy from natural gas. Now this cumulatively becomes my basket of energy. Now if I am essentially tinkering or changing the constituent of this basket. So what I am doing? I am changing the basket constituents. I am changing the basket constituents. So today I was using oil, gas and coal. Now I want to use oil, gas and coal, but with a certain mix of solar energy, with a certain mix of, let's say, wind energy. So today what we are saying is that the world is moving from a fossil fuel centric energy basket. Please understand, fossil fuel centric energy basket to a clean and renewable energy basket. That means what? Simply we are saying that if you are getting today 100% from your fossil fuels, today you will get less than 50% from fossil fuels, and rest will be coming from renewable energy. And why do we call it renewable? Because they are not finite. Now, what is the driver for all this? Why are we moving towards this energy transition? So one thing is that the idea of climate change. Now, someone developed themselves for 200 years, they produced a lot of carbon. So think about it. If you have coal, it is nothing but carbon, and this carbon is captured beneath the surface of Earth. This carbon is there beneath the surface of Earth. It is stored. Once you start burning it, you are actually bringing that carbon which is stored to the atmosphere. And so now you are changing the composition of the atmosphere, and the moment you add something artificial in the atmosphere, you call it air pollution. The moment you are polluting the air, some part of these pollutants tend to attract the UV rays and they tend to absorb the heat, and if they absorb this heat, they become the greenhouse gases. So for the period of time, for 200 years, you have used coal, gas, your oil, and eventually you have released these carbon elements, carbon oriented gases, your carbon dioxide, into the atmosphere, and over the period of time, this atmosphere has started to absorb more and more heat, and this is called your anthropocentric heating of the earth, or what you call as global warming. Now, global warming is one of the examples of climate change, and we must understand that the world is very clearly headed towards climate change debates and some action, some mitigation, some form of solution of all these changes. Why? Because today climate change is affecting all of us. And that we have seen in previous analyst session, how climate change is leading to more incessant rainfall, to more flooding. It is leading to cloudburst. It is leading to cascading disasters. We discussed, your Sikkim cascading disaster. We discussed incessant rainfall in the Himachal Pradesh, in the Himalayas. So all these events or extreme climate events are triggered by climate change, and therefore the world is looking to find a solution to this anthropocentric heating of the earth. And so what we want to simply do is to reduce the amount of pollutants, reduce the amount of carbon centric pollutants from the atmosphere. So we have some climate change goals. Then the photovoltaic mass production, which has picked up across the globe, particularly wherever you have labor centric production, wherever the labor rates, they are cheaper. For example, your Southeast Asia, India, South Asia, you are looking at China. So all these countries, they are now mass producing the photovoltaic cells. Then you are also getting a lot of ESG based funding. So investors today, they are looking at companies and they are looking at the ESG rating. What does it mean? It means the companies which are prioritizing environmental, social and governance issues. So if you are a green company, if you are green centric, you are moving into green technologies, then you tend to attract these green funds. So investors are happy, large investment banks are happy, so they will fund you. If they fund you, your venture can scale up, right? And if you scale up, you start doing what? You start doing the mass production. So you go on scale. Then the talk about connected grids. So earlier, 10 years ago, what you used to get is you used to get lanterns, solar lanterns. Now, if you have a solar lantern, you can get light. Then you had solar based, some lightings on the road which are getting recharged from the sun. Today, what we are saying is that whatever solar energy I am producing, you are producing, we can all pool that solar energy to the grid. And we have discussed in solar energy that you can, you can have grid connected solar electricity, or it can be without the connection to the grid. But today, across the world, we are connecting these large solar plants with the grids. Simultaneously, the world has also moved economically. So now countries are also connecting their grids. Why? Because we want to transfer energy. We want to trade energy. One example is that we have connected our grids with Bangladesh, right? We have connected our grids with Nepal. So we import a lot of hydroelectricity from Nepal. And similarly, we exchange a lot of electricity. We pump in a lot of electricity to Bangladesh. So it is what? It is electricity trade. Similarly with Bhutan, we take in a lot of imports, energy imports from Bhutan, and to utilize the Himalayan hydroelectric potential. One more aspect is electrification. Now, we tend to ignore this aspect. So think about it. One person was drawing a rickshaw puller with his mechanical strength, okay, physical strength. Over the period of time, what we have seen? We have seen battery powered e-rickshaws, right? So what are we doing? We are electrifying the grid. Then you had your trains. These trains were run on what? Let's say they had diesel engines or they were powered by coal. Now what do you see? You see that electrification of Indian railways, and this has happened across the globe. So you are electrifying public mass transport. With electrification, what happens? Now what you need is electricity. What you need is electricity, and it is immaterial from whichever source electricity is coming. You just want electricity. Then the world has done wonders in terms of energy storage. So battery is one area where a lot of companies, so battery and its associated minerals is one such areas where the globe is moving, and all Indian companies are hedging towards this area. Simultaneously, you have the regulation and commitment to decarbonize. Decarbonize means remove or decrease the amount of carbon in your entire energy grid and remove it from your, say, transportation networks, or at least try to decrease the amount of carbon emissions that are happening. Now, if you simply look at this particular presentation, this is the typical presentation of a energy transition. Now, what do you see? That gradually the green energy is increasing, and then you will see that the other sources, they are somehow peaking at around, let's say, 2030 to 2050. Why 2050? Because the globe has promised net zero by 2050. So by 2050, under any circumstance, the globe has promised in front of UNFCCC that we will try to go for 50% of our, and we are talking about the major economies, 50% of our energy mix will come from renewable sources. That means the sources which are not finite. So this simply if you can show this, that how can we represent it, that over the period of time my renewable energy it will mix, and over the period of time my already high non-renewable energy, it will somehow peak, and combination of both of this is the total energy, and this total energy will seem to rise. Why? The total energy is required to fuel the developing countries to then transition to the developed economy status. Now look at India's shift to renewables. Now this particular data, it is showing you how the new energy sources that we are adding year on year. So in 2011, whatever new energy sources we were adding, majority of it was coal. What happened in 17? You'll see that majority of the renewable energy sources are being added, and this is a trend which is to continue for the next 10 years or 20 years, until we are able to clearly identify what amount of energy India will need in the next 20 years to become, let's say, a 10 or 20 trillion dollar economy, and to fulfill that with a healthy mix of renewable and non-renewable resources. Now at this juncture, you should please understand that India has not promised to go for net zero by 2050. India has promised what? Net zero by 2070, which is part of our Panchamrita goals. Now, when you are looking at the different sources of energy, please understand that every day you will think that we are trying to find at least 1% or 0.1% of new energy resources apart from oil and coal. So you are looking at wind energy, okay? Then you are looking at solar energy, you are looking at biomass. So biomass can give you also biogas. Then you have biogas, you have low impact hydropower, you have geothermal energy, you have tidal energy, you have capturing your wave energy, geothermal energy. All these sources, they are coming from within the earth. Then you have hydropower. Now at some point of time, hydropower projects, especially the bigger project, they can have some adverse impact. But especially the localized smaller hydropower projects or run of the river projects, they are considered more greener. Then you are looking at coal, oil, natural gas. Now the thing about nuclear energy is that nuclear energy is considered as clean because of no emissions. However, there are some adverse issues, for example, nuclear failure or nuclear waste. So it is considered on the transition zone particularly. You cannot completely say that it is a renewable source, or you cannot say it is a polluting source also. So it's on the transition. Now, how will the energy mix look like over the period of time is that in 2010, 16% of energy coming from renewable energy, and by 2030, 50%. And what kind of energy mix we are looking at? So we are looking at 800 gigawatt to 1000 gigawatt by the end of 2030, and that simply means that we will have close to 400 gigawatt to 500 gigawatt of renewable as well as non-renewable energy sources. When you look at the overall energy resources of India, when you are looking at overall energy, please understand this. So this is about energy and this is about electricity. So what are you finding? You are finding that 52% of your electricity is coming from coal. Coal, that means you are dependent on thermal power plant. thermal power plant. Then you see solar is 15%, wind is 10%, hydropower is 13%, nuclear is 2%. So all these constituents, their proportion in this entire overall capacity will set to increase. On the other hand, pay close attention to the energy mix, you will see that 74% of your total energy needs are still met by fossil fuels. Here, what do you see? You see that you have coal, you have oil, you have natural gas, and you have very little energy coming from renewable energy. So when you are looking at energy, the proportion of renewable is still lower. When you're looking at electricity, we have completely moved or hedged towards the renewable energy mix that we are targeting. Let's look at privacy. So this is a debate of privacy in the backdrop of the UCC coming in Uttarakhand, and this is part of your GS2 Indian Constitution. Now, what do you understand by privacy? So today, privacy is a fundamental right. A fundamental right under Article 21 beyond the J. Puttaswamy judgment that we'll look at. Now, how do you define privacy? So it is nothing. So privacy is a fundamental right that encompasses the ability of individuals to control their personal information and to control their choices. What to do, what not to do, what to tell, what not to tell. And it is to determine how, when, and to what extent that information is shared. So let's say you and I are having a private conversation, and if somebody snoops on us, then it will be a violation of privacy or not. Let's say two private sector companies, they are talking to each other, and let's say some governmental organization is snooping on the conversation. Can it be called a violation of privacy? At the face, we can say that there is some private conversation, but whether it is a private conversation or not, whether it's a violation of privacy, will be adjudicated by whom? It will be adjudicated by the court of law, right? Now, please understand that if you are talking about Article 21 of the Indian Constitution, that means you are talking about Part 3. Part 3 of what? Part 3 of fundamental rights. That means if my rights of privacy are violated, can I approach the court? Can I approach the court? The answer is explicitly yes. You can approach your court under Article 32 as well as under Article 226. So you can either go to the high courts or you can directly reach to the Supreme Court and say that my lords, my rights of privacy, which is part of my fundamental right, they have been violated. Now, it includes the right to autonomy and confidentiality in various aspects of one's life, including personal, professional, and digital domains. Now, when you look at the Constitution, did we have something called as privacy? Do you have a privacy word in the Constitution which has been defined? The answer is no. Do we have privacy in the fundamental right in the bare act of the Constitution? The answer is no. That brings us the question that how come today we have the right to privacy? So you have the laws which have been created by the legislature, okay, by the parliament, by the state governments, etc. And then you have the judgments of the Supreme Court and the Honorable High Court which are to be followed. So part of judgment and part of the law, the combination of this will be telling us whether something is legal or not. So, by the court's dictum, today we know that it is the right to privacy. But has this been mentioned in the Constitution? The answer is no. Now, privacy as a human right is enjoyed by every human being by virtue of his or her existence. Now, what else can you attach to privacy? So, it simply means that bodily integrity, you want personal autonomy, you want information self-determination, whether you want to decimate an information or not, whether you want to tell someone or not. the idea of protection from state surveillance. Do you want snooping the way it's happening in China? Do you want CCTVs on your head all over? Do you want face recognition? Do you want the private conversation between two individuals to be leaked? So is it a private conversation? The answer is yes. If it is leaked through state surveillance, will it be a violation? Possibly. What about dignity? So a lot of private information, it is attached to your dignity, and please understand that dignity is part of your right to life. So in Menka Gandhi, the Supreme Court held that the right to life is not mere animal existence. It also entails a dignified life. So you cannot just exist like an animal. You have to be a human who has emotions, a human who is expressing, a human who is talking. And so it is not mere animal existence. It is dignified living. Then what about confidentiality? So you want to keep some aspects of your life confidential. Then it also protects you from compelled speech. You have to tell me this, you have to tell me this, you have to tell me this. You cannot be compelled. Then freedom to dissent or to move or to think. So to not agree is also your right to privacy. Now please understand what is the background, how it all started. So in 2012, retired Justice K.S. Puttaswamy approached the Supreme Court and he challenged the validity of the Aadhaar scheme. At that point of time, there was no Aadhaar Act, and so it was a scheme, right, which entailed some parts of biometric, right? So that brought it to the court's attention on a challenge. Now, in 2015, a bench of 3 judges, they passed an order to examine these two judgments. Why? Because up till that point of time there was no right of privacy. And in MP Sharma and Satish Chandra, that is 1954, and Khadak Singh versus State of Uttar Pradesh, that is a 1964 judgment, in both these cases the Supreme Court was very clear that we don't have a right to privacy, and we'll discuss these cases in detail. Then what happened is the court wanted to know whether we have a fundamental right, that is the right to privacy in Article 21. This is a very good example of why we call Indian constitution as a living constitution, why it is so organic. Because over the period of time, the moment the society thinks that there is a change, there is a social change, and there has been no legal change, right? So the legal change comes through these catena of judgments from the Supreme Court. Then it was elevated to a 5-judge bench and later to a 9-judge bench. And in 2017, the bench unanimously recognized that privacy is a fundamental right of every individual guaranteed under the Constitution under Article 21. Parallelly, you should also know that in the backdrop, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights has already recognized privacy as a human right. So it was a human right in 1948, and it was appreciated as a fundamental right under the Indian Constitution after the J. Puttaswamy judgment, which began in 2012 and the judgment was delivered in 2017. Now, these case laws, they become extremely important, or wherever, let's say you are discussing a case study, you are writing an ethics answer. So you should have these sound arguments to present, to take the side of privacy, or to, let's say there is a simple case study that, you are a state personnel and you are asked to surveil a particular person, a particular individual, right? And let's say the case study says that this particular individual happens to be a critic of the political party which is in dispensation, right? So as an officer, as an ethical officer, what kind of precautions you will take before going for snooping? So that you should understand, and you can understand these things by looking at the judgments. So in MP Sharma versus Satish Chandra, the court decided in favor of practice of search and seizure when contrasted with privacy. That means you can go and search and seizure. And who is conducting the search and seizure? The police. Police is part of Article 12, which is the state. Then you have Khadak Singh versus State of UP. Khadak Singh versus State of UP. Now here, examined the power of police surveillance, and it ruled in the favor of the police as the right of privacy is not guaranteed under the constitution. So these two judgments, they were explicit on their that right to privacy is not there under the Indian constitution. Then in Gobind versus state of MP, it introduced a logic that is you should have compelling state interest. So a test was introduced that the state, that means the police or any authority which is working under the government, so they should have a very compelling, a very cogent reason, a compelling reason to go ahead and go for such intrusion into someone's private life. The court stated that right of privacy of an individual would have to give way to larger state interests. That till today, that till Gobind versus state of MP, it was very clear that states' interests are higher. Then PUCL versus Union of India, very important case. Okay, then telephone tapping case, it is also called that individuals had a privacy interest in the contents of their telecommunications or telephonic conversations. That means if you are listening to what I am talking on phone, are you violating my right to privacy? So somehow PUCL hinted at this. That naturally, if I'm calling a particular person, I'm talking to that person, and I'm talking to that person, how can you leak or how can you listen to the private conversations of these two people, right? And lastly, you have J. Puttaswamy versus Union of India. This is a 2017 case. Here, it centered around Aadhaar, unique ID, and after giving their biometrics and demographic details. And in this particular judgment only, we got the right to privacy. Now, at this juncture, you must also understand that right to privacy has not been clearly defined as of yet. And this aspect will again be reiterated through a lot of judgments of what is private, what is not private. And therefore, any particular article or any particular judgment which comes on privacy or which elaborates on privacy will also become very important for our UPSC. Let's look at the World Trade Organization. Now, India is to exclude labor green issues during WTO discussions. And this is very important because part of your GS3 economy. Now, please understand that every country would like to trade and you want to go for mutual transfer of goods and services and people. Why? Because at times, again, when we are looking at oil, what did we see? That in some places there is oil, right? And then in some places you have consumers. So the countries who are having oil, if they give this oil, so what will happen? They will earn in dollars. They will earn in dollars, right? So there is a reciprocal interest here with both the countries, both the trading partners. And so this mutual exchange of goods, services, ideas, peoples, investment, etc. is what we entail under trade. And naturally, if the globe is trading, we want a rule-based trading. So the way China trades with Sri Lanka and the way India trades with Sri Lanka, there should be some uniformity. Why? Let's say China does not abide by any rules. Okay, so what it will do to create jobs domestically, it will heavily subsidize its own industry. Let's say the telephone industry, the semiconductor industry, it will heavily subsidize. And so what will happen? The producers who are there in China, their cost of production will go down. Yes or no? If the cost of production goes down, then what happens? Then they will be able to, if their cost of production goes down, then they will be able to do what? Then they will be able to export more, and Chinese product will be searched for because they are cheaper, right? And you can take this example from the Chinese handsets that are available, or for that matter, you can also dump products. So today, let's say I have a extreme amount of inventory. I have too much of inventory in my industry, and this inventory my government doesn't like, and the government wants that this inventory should be cleaned up. So now, can I give some, let's say, tax rate cuts? Can I give some, let's say, taxation breaks along with some incentives so that you can dump this item in Sri Lanka, in Nepal? The answer is yes. Now the question is, all that we discussed, was it a fair move on China? If China is, let's say, providing $200 billion of subsidy, should India also provide $200 billion of subsidy? And let's say Indonesia also wants to export. So can Indonesia give $200 billion of subsidy? Possibly not, and absolutely not. Doesn't have the size to provide $200 billion. So please understand that at least India could compete. But what about the smaller nations? They would never compete. And entail what they will become? They will become the dumb ground of these Chinese items. And this brings us to the exact need of WTO, is that we want a rule-based, law-based trading. And we want some uniformity. And please understand that the WTO, it's an intergovernmental organization which regulates international trade, and the precursor to WTO was GATT, G-A-T-T. Now, it has 164 members and over 98% of global trade and GDP. Now, about GATT, it had a lack of institutional structure, limited coverage of services. So, when we are talking about goods were covered. Then services was not included. Today, what we are trying to do, we are trying to open the horizon of trade. So earlier we were looking at only goods, then goods, services, ideas, investment, people transferring from here and there, they are working here. So more hybridization. With globalization, you are expecting more and more people to work in hybrid setups, more and more people to work in remote setups. So you will find a lot of IT, and you will find a lot of coders who are working for US based startups, and they're staying at home in India, right? So all this is enabled by more globalization, and possibly it can also lead to temporary migration of people. So all those structures are being opened up. Simultaneously, there was limited coverage of intellectual property rights. Now intellectual property rights entails your patents, your copyrights, etc. So GATT, whatever deficiency GATT had, so WTO as a successor had to replace all of this. Then the absence of a strong dispute resolution mechanism. Why do you have disputes? First of all, because China is dumping product, India doesn't like it. India should have a forum where it goes and says, oh, China is abusing the trade laws, it is going against the global norms, and so there should be some reprimanding of China or stopping China from doing all of this. Now there are some certain principles of WTO. One is a non-discrimination. This is the most favored nation rule, which requires equal treatment of all trade partners. So I cannot treat Nepal and Sri Lanka differently. If I am giving 10% import duty on goods coming of a particular sector, let's say 10% import duty on tablets coming from Nepal, then 10% import duty on tablets coming from Sri Lanka. I cannot say 12%, right? So I cannot distort my tax rates or create these barriers of trade, right? I have to treat all the WTO member nations equally. Then the national treatment policy. It ensures that imported goods are treated no less favorably than domestic goods. Let's say if there is an import and I say Chinese mal hai. So if I am tagging everything, let's say, so that there is some amount of discrimination towards a goods manufactured from a particular country. So what will happen? This will lead to violation of national treatment. So let's say India is manufacturing some Apple iPhones, and let's say some iPhones are being manufactured in Indonesia, and so both are there in the market. So I cannot mark them that not made in India, this is made in India. So such discriminatory patterns in trade will not be considered. Once the good has come into your shore, you consider it as your national good, right? Don't go for any reprimand against a particular country. Then reciprocity aims to limit free riding and obtaining better access to foreign market. Now think about it. Let's say I want to export Royal Enfields and US is giving me 20% import duty. On the other hand, I want to import Harley Davidson, on which I am imposing 100% import duty. So what will happen? So US will fight with us and they will say, okay, if you don't want this, then I will raise the tariff on the Royal Enfields that you want to export to us. Then you have binding and enforceable commitments. You have transparency, where members must publish trade regulations and notify changes to WTO. Once you are publicly declaring your trade policies, trade schemes, So what happens if any member countries, they have a problem, they can have a talk to you, they can go for negotiations with you. If still there is a dispute, they can go for dispute settlement mechanism. Then there is also something called as trade policy review mechanism, which facilitates country specific trade policy review. Now let's say there are some particular structural problems in one country, then such review can also happen. Now about the organizational structure, so at the topmost you have the ministerial conference, which meets at least once every 2 years. Then at the second level you have multiple general councils. One is the general council, then you have the dispute settlement body, which we discussed in the previous analyst. Then you have trade policy review body to analyze members' trade policies, and at the last level you have the goods council, the services council, and the TRIPS council. Now please understand that TRIPS is related to IPR, that is intellectual property. Goods, you are talking about goods, you are talking about services here. Dispute settlement is about adjudication. General council will look into the day-to-day affairs of ministerial conference. So ministers are meeting every 2 years. They will not day-to-day activity. Who will do the day-to-day activity? It will be the general council. Dispute settlement body look into various matters and will adjudicate who is right, who is wrong, who has to modify, who has to face some reprimand. Then trade policy review body, this is to ensure that, let's say there are so many complaints against a particular trade policy, then that policy can be reviewed. Thank you so much. I hope it helped.